Today I'm going to be talking about how to extend the life of your cut flowers. Once you've brought them home and you've arranged them in your vase, how do you actually make them last longer? And firstly, I'm going to be talking about the requirements you need to choose your vase and the correct nutrients and water and how you cut the stems and things like that. So to begin with, we need to select a clean vase. Now this is very, very important. If you want to make sure it's clean, what I would suggest you do is get a little bit of bleach in some warm water. Just give it a good scrub out with a suitable brush. Obviously not the brush you use when you're washing up your dishes, but I keep an old brush handy in my laundry sink, and when I buy flowers for myself, I will use this as a method to clean my vase. Now, you don't need a lot of bleach, just a little bit of bleach in the water goes a long way. Just be mindful that you're better off to wear gloves to protect your hands from bleach, and also to be careful what you're wearing, because if you splash bleach on your clothes, it will bleach your clothes. So that's the first thing. Please make sure you select a clean vase. If you put flower preservatives in the vase, they'll be wasted on flowers that are placed in a dirty vase. And when you're thinking about a vase as well, also think about the size of it. Is it big enough to hold the flowers that you have? If your stems are particularly long, will the flowers wilt over the side and fall over the side if your vase is too short? So make sure that your vase is tall enough and wide enough at both the top and the bottom, but it's not too large so that the flowers get lost in the middle as well. So you just need to choose the right vase. The next thing you need to do is you need to add clean water and nutrients. Now, it is suggested by the Professional Florist Association of New South Wales that you would use a commercial floral preservative. And this is because it's made scientifically to make your flowers last as long as possible. However, I do not do this, and many florists actually do not do this, because the solution is expensive, and quite often florists can't afford to maintain this kind of practice. So what is suggested is that you can do a few different things. One of the most simplest things is to add bleach in your water. So just, we didn't really ever measure it in the florist shop. We kind of just did a bit of a splash in the water. Ideally, warm water is better, though when you're thinking about a flower shop and the amount of water that you go through, you generally don't use warm water. They suggest to use warm water because it helps kill the bacteria that's present on flower stems. And when flower stems are sitting in water for a week, you'll find that they will, build bacteria. So keep in mind that obviously you need to recut the stems, but we'll talk about that in a little while. Another method you can use for a floral preservative is to use an aspirin, a soluble aspirin. These are quite good to use. If you don't feel comfortable using a tablet, you can also use a little bit of sugar in the water as well. Again, don't be too fussy, maybe a tablespoon of sugar. It does need to be dissolved in warm water though, otherwise the sugar would just sit on the bottom of the vase. So you do need to do some research into certain flowers. Some flowers do not like sugar, some flowers do not like bleach. But generally you can get away with a little bit of bleach, a little bit of sugar in the water for most flowers. Thirdly, the best way to cut stems is under the water, on an angle under the water. Now everybody suggests this, but practically speaking, it doesn't suit most flower shops. When you get 3 or 4 boxes of flowers, which could contain, 20 to 30 and more, depending what flowers they are, bunches of flowers in a box, you're going to be having all hands on deck. So sometimes, at different flower shops that I've worked in, I might be the only florist. At other times of the year, you might have 6 florists in there, but then you're getting a lot more boxes as well. You don't have the resources as a sink, say for instance, or buckets or that much water access to be able to cut every single stem under the water. It is ideal, of course, but quite often you're not pulling out one bunch from a box of flowers at a time and doing them. You might be doing, 4 bunches of gerberas, things like that. So you don't generally cut them under the water. It's just not practical. I also don't do that at home either, because I have cheap secateurs that will rust if I expose them to high volumes of water. And seriously, I've always found that if you look after your flowers properly, they will last at least a week, depending what flowers you buy. Okay. They recommend that some people recommend that you cut 3 to 5 centimetres off the bottom of a flower. I don't think that's necessary, because you're going to lose your stem length in a week. You won't really have much flower length left if you're cutting them every couple of days. So in my tutorial video in part A and B, I mentioned that, and probably, I'm not sure about part C actually, but definitely the first 2 parts, mention about what a healthy stem looks like. So when I purchased those particular flowers, the liliums that I purchased were really fresh. The stock was really fresh. It was like it had come in that day. Now, you don't generally see that very often. Quite often, flowers will come through a market where the flower grower will deliver them to your flower shop, and then you don't really know how old those flowers are. And quite often you will have problems with your flowers. They won't be as fresh as what you would like them to be. And quite often, sometimes you have to change your flower growers if this becomes a problem or a repeated problem. But generally, you do have to cut about 1 to 2 centimetres off your stem. Now, for those ones that I purchased the other day, they were very fresh. I think they came in on the day. I cut 1 centimetre off each stem, and that was fine. Another thing also to think about is when you're placing flowers into a vase is to strip the leaves or any leaves that are going to be in the water. So I mentioned in my video that part A and part B is that I like to keep the greenery on my flowers because I like greenery. And once upon a time, I, as a novice florist or a beginner florist, I should say, is I would have added a lot of greenery to my bunches. And back when I learnt floristry, that was just what you did. You added a lot of green. Every bunch had a lot of greenery to make your flowers look fuller, make your bunches look fuller. Whereas in the later years of floristry, in the naughty years, or even after 2010, which I didn't really do a lot of floristry after 2010. It was more my own work. I generally didn't include a lot of greenery because it had kind of gone out of fashion by then. So people expected full bunches, but it was the way you designed them that presented a fuller bunch rather than using a lot of greenery. Okay. Another thing to be mindful of is to carefully place your flowers in the container. So when you put your flowers in, make sure that you don't smash them to the bottom of the vase, because this can do one or two things. It can actually flatten your nice, lovely angle of your flower stem, of your cut flower stem. So when you've cut your flower stem, you've cut it on an angle so that it's not sitting on the bottom of the vase. This is very important. If it's sitting on the bottom of the vase, flush with the vase, the water won't be able to seep up into the stem and your flower will die very quickly. So please make sure that you cut your flower stems on an angle, but just be mindful of how you're placing them in the water as well. Another thing is to keep flowers away from drafts and full sunshine. So think about the position where you position the flowers in your house and where you display them. Make sure that they are not near any doorways or windows that are open. If there's a draft coming in, they will reduce the shelf life of your flowers. If they're too close to heat or air conditioning vents, they will dry out quickly. And basically they'll just wilt. So the ideal site would have to be a cool temperature with a high relative humidity, which I don't have here at my current address. But I must say that my flowers have lasted well because I've made sure that the place that I've placed them has had direct sunlight but hasn't had the sun shining in on them. And I've been careful with making sure I change the water every 2 days. While direct sunlight is harmful, bright light is beneficial to cut flowers because it allows the remaining leaves to continue to produce some of their own food, which actually helps the flowers to stay lively for a bit longer. So flowers should not be placed on top of the television for one of 2 reasons really, or refrigerator or near fish tanks or below standard lamps. This is not to mention the electricity versus the water debate. Obviously, if you spill some water on the television or the refrigerator or near standard lamps, you could have an electrical issue. But obviously, you don't place them near these sources of heat because they will shorten the life of your blooms. I'm going to touch on ethylene. Ethylene's a really important component of shelf life for flowers. So quite often you'll see flowers for sale in fruit and vegetable shops or in petrol stations. I would steer clear of buying flowers in these places because they both have toxic ethylene where the flowers will just not last as long. Quite often they won't recut their flowers, so quite often you'll look at the flower. I always look at flowers in these places wherever I just always look at. Whenever I go past flower shops, I'm always looking. I look at flowers in Aldi or Woolworths. I generally just look at flowers to see how they care for them, because sometimes you do have to buy. Well, I think you do have to buy flowers for people sometimes. It makes them feel happy and loved, and I want to be making sure that if I'm spending my hard-earned money, that the flowers are going to last as long as possible. So ethylene is a natural odorless plant hormone that is produced as a gas. So it comes from vehicle exhaust, and it also comes from damaged and dying flowers and foliage as well, ripening fruit, cigarette smoke, and the flowers themselves. So if your household is a household that has cigarette smoke in it, your flowers will die much quicker because you're exposing them to high doses of ethylene produced from the smoke. Also, fruit shops with ripening fruit, obviously, and vehicle exhaust with petrol stations. So it basically acts as an accelerator to aging in flowers, and it can drastically reduce the vase life of particularly sensitive flowers. Now, I do have a list. If you're in my class, in my floristry subject class for work experience, you will have a list of ethylene sensitive flowers, and they include things like snapdragon, stock, sweet peas, waratah, roses, Geraldton wax, gypsophilia, which is also identified as baby's breath, gladioli, gerbera, freesia, bavaria, carnations, cornflower, delphinium, to name a few. For the last few things to how to make your flowers last longer, you need to top the vase up with fresh water regularly. So ideally, it should be changed every 2 days in my opinion. Okay, because anything longer than that, you'll start getting a smell to the vase. Now, this morning I changed my flowers after day 3 because I kind of got a bit slack after, day 7. And even though I have already changed my water twice, day 2, day 4, but I've let them slip till day 7 before I changed the water again this morning. Now, the water was smelly. Okay, which means bacteria has started to form, which means I won't get as much shelf life out of those flowers. Now, that was doing everything right. In a flower shop, quite often you will have, it's one of the yucky things about working in a flower shop is the smelliness of the water. It gets quite pungent to the point that you're almost dry reaching. Some buckets can be left for a week at a time easily if you've just kind of forgotten about it. They're kind of the flowers that you kind of put aside, but really don't ever do anything with because, you have a good reputation as a florist and you always serve fresh flowers. But you might have them there and you might, think, I might take them home or whatever, but they kind of get left there for a bit longer. And before you know it, you've got this bucket of toxic water. It is disgusting. Not only is it gross, but it lingers. That smell lingers in your florist shop and it lingers in your nostrils for the whole day. So, pre-warning, make sure that you clean out your vase every 2 days. Give it a bit of a scrub if you can be bothered. I generally can't be bothered. It is better if you do give it a bit of a clean out with, there's my timer. Give it a bit of a clean out with some bleach to preserve it. But again, you might only get a couple more days of life out of it. Okay, so that's ethylene and the vase with fresh water. And obviously you can recut the stems as well. So obviously you should recut the stems at least 1 to 2 centimetres every day. Again, keep in mind the length of your flower stem. It may not be possible to do this. So at night, you generally place your flowers in a cool position. Keep in mind that if you have pets in the house as well, that when you're not there, the pets won't necessarily do what they're meant to. So if they're likely to get up on tables where vases can be knocked over, maybe move the vase into an area that you can close the door, maybe into a cool area that you can close the door. Make sure that they're not near drafts and, the windows are shut and things like that. Once the flowers have expired, discard them and clean the vase thoroughly. So it's very important that you don't just tip out the water and return the vase to wherever the vase was sitting before. Make sure that you clean it out to kill any bacteria that's sitting in there, because when you get that vase back out again, rather than re-cleaning it, and doing the job that you should have done when you chuck the flowers out, you know that you're going to be picking up that vase and it's going to be ready to go. So I hope that's helpful on how to make your flowers last longer. If you're in my class, you'll have a sheet titled Introducing the Professional Florist Association of New South Wales with some tips on there. And I also will be adding my own tips to that as well via Google Classroom. So I hope this helps you, and keep buying flowers for people because, some people really love flowers. I love flowers. And some people think they're a waste of money, but they're just not. Everything's relative as far as I'm concerned. So keep buying those flowers and, inform people now that you know how to make flowers last longer.